All right, y'all. Welcome to the Project Lioness podcast. This is Dr. Mel, still hanging out in the jungle, joined by my amazing business partner and younger brother. Have to say younger, Michael.
Hello. I am younger.
And today we're jamming on and asking the question, what are you living for? What are you living for, Michael?
Yeah, living for the 6 a.m. coffee right now.
We're hanging out in the jungle at the Costa Rica Inspire Immersion. And we have talked a lot about why we live for what we live for and asking the question, what are we living for? And specifically, how that relates to the finite and the infinite game of life. So, Michael, what is the finite versus infinite game that we as humans play, or maybe even don't realize we're playing in life?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mel. Thanks for asking that. It's an interesting topic, something that we covered here at the Immersion, and something that I've been talking a lot more with clients, talking about it both in group and one-to-one perspectives, and even just sharing more and more, and something that I've been diving into for myself. And the best way for me to explain it, I think, is with my own story. So throughout a lot of my life, I lived in these finite games, or another way you can look at it is like outcomes versus behaviors, and just wanting to achieve said outcomes. So for me, and again, some of this is maybe a little bit more subjective. You would hear the term finite game and think it has to be objective and achieving, some set numbers or whatever it may be. But a lot of my life, I tried to do certain things for said outcomes. So growing up, I didn't feel the best about myself on the inside. So I tried to be like friends with everyone. And that was my goal, was like to make everyone like me, even though I didn't like myself on the inside. Obviously playing sports are finite games, right? Or just approaching things with the perspective that I want to do this quickly for said reason without thinking about what's going to happen after. And even when I started, losing weight and getting healthy, which again, my story, I can share that at a different time, but there was this idea that if I just get to, if I just lose 150 pounds, then I'll be happy. If I just see my abs, then I'll be happy. If I can just do X, Y, Z, then I'll be happy. And that's kind of what the finite game is. Oftentimes it's a cycle that people get stuck in where they feel like they need to accomplish said thing to feel said way or to have said result, rather than just focusing on the habits and the behaviors that make up our life. And really what it does is it takes us out of the present moment and makes us think that we need to be chasing some sort of thing. And when you live in the finite game perspective, I've found that a lot of people never really get there.
Right.
It's just looking for the next thing all the time. So.
Right. And I know you and I have talked about this before too, but it's like when this happens, then I'll feel some way, and it's very conditional.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, obviously, we grew up in a similar environment. When I was younger, it was in different ways, right? It was if I get all A's, then maybe I'll feel like I'm worthy of love. Or if I become the captain of the team, then I'll feel confident enough. So it's this if-then dynamic that I'm hearing you speak to versus, well, what would allow me to know that I'm confident now? Regardless of whatever outcome. There's also a lot of attachment with that. And you and I talk about this a lot, but the dopamine cycle, right?
Yeah.
Like, cool, you hit this goal or you achieve said outcome. I know for the clients you work with, right? Whether it's weight loss or certain, work with a lot of golfers and athletes, said thing in athletics, but then it's like, okay, what's next? And there can be this easy dopamine hit, not easy, but quick dopamine hit. And then all of a sudden I notice a lot of people fall into this trap of then feeling depressed right after because they're playing the finite game.
Yeah, it's working to, again, achieve that thing. And then it's like you get there and then it's like, what's next? What's next? And there's always that perspective of what's next. And I think kind of like you alluded to, especially with a lot of the clients that I work with are focused on weight loss. And a lot of what I actually do with my clients, obviously I focus on nutrition and fitness and stress management and all of those things, restorative sleep. But a lot of what I do with my clients is helping them realize like this is a long game, and whether you hit whatever your goal weight loss is by X date or not doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. What matters is that you're actually working on transforming the way that you perceive and show up with and interact with things like fitness, things like nutrition, things like your family and relationships, right? Those are the things that actually matter over time. Because I just see a lot of people get stuck in this cycle of, I got to lose, 40 pounds for summer, or I need to lose, 20 pounds for the wedding or whatever it may be. And they just end up just on this back and forth cycle.
Yep.
And like you said, it gets reinforced by a lot of times they do hit it and they achieve the goal and they look really good for the thing. And then it's just like, okay, well, then I'm straight back to my regular, whatever I have been doing.
Because it wasn't tied into something that is infinite, right?
Yeah,
Which
it wasn't
is
tied to their values, their actual
Yes.
true values and desires for life.
Right.
So
It wasn't tied into their vision or mission or purpose, which can happen in any moment and any time. And I love that you speak to this because it reminds me of what I talk about with my clients, and that's this ability to know who you're becoming in the process. So less about, again, the outcome and more, what are you learning about yourself in the behavior, in the choices, in the journey, and who are you becoming as a result of going through the journey versus chasing the outcome. So it's more of this becoming process, which is more of the infinite game, because we're always becoming, we're always transforming, we're always changing, if you're conscious of that or not, versus like outcome in time. And you can get really trapped in these time cycles, as you said.
Yeah.
So as far as finite, then how do we start to choose, and what is the infinite game?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm going to start that question by recognizing the finite game and the cycle that it portrays and how we need to change that to get into the infinite game. So with the finite game, like we talked about, a lot of times there's really high emotions around it, and there's the perception of pass fail, of even good bad, right? So again, for me, example wise, because a lot of what I did and the success that I saw in health was around weight loss and sustaining it. A lot of the clients I work with are around weight loss. People get into this cycle where they try to achieve X goal. Well, let's just say again, for example, it's losing 50 pounds, and they're trekking it, weighing themselves every day or every other day, and being really strict and diligent with their diet, and like they are feeling really good about it. And then eventually they get there, and there's this massive like release, like I feel so good, like joy, elation, right? Higher frequency emotions, we'll call it. And then once they get there, they feel good, but then the next day they are already detached from that outcome, that realization that they've made it, and they don't really know how to operate going forward. Does that make sense? It's like, I did it, what's next? Because they didn't have a vision or a perspective or even tie it to how they want to live beyond that. They just wanted to do the thing. And then immediately that can bring them into apathy. It can bring them into fear and not knowing what's next. And it can bring them into just lower emotional states and recognizing like, I did this thing, but like, what do I do now?
Right.
And that actually hinders them from continuing to do those things. Another perspective is if your goal is, again, 50 pounds of weight loss, but you're not making progress, then the lower frequency emotions come in quicker, but it comes in the form of blame and shame. And like, I'm upset with myself or angry that I'm not making this progress, or blaming myself because, I had a piece of cheesecake or whatever it may be. Something's like, in the grand scheme of things, it really isn't going to make that big of a difference. But they're doing these little things that aren't in alignment with these finite or shorter term outcome goals. And it perpetuates the cycle of, well, I can't do this. And then they lose belief in themselves, which is the most important thing. So when we recognize that finite games are really cycles that are played over and over again, the infinite game is this ability or this duality of recognizing like there are things that you want to accomplish in life and like bigger outcome things, but the only way you can do that is by separating yourself from the desire or from the wanting for it. It's not even, you can still want it and still desire it, but it's just separating yourself and just recognizing like when it happens, it will. But the only thing I control is the inputs.
Right.
And as long as I'm doing inputs and things that are in alignment with my values, with the way that I want to live, and I'm staying present in the moment, that's how you eventually accomplish those goals without having to focus on them. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. And I'm hearing too, there's I always filter things through with my clients, the brain perspective. And when we go into the model of the finite game, it's chasing, it's amygdala, we think we are our emotions versus understanding in the human experience we will have emotion, but that doesn't mean that's who we are. And simultaneously, we are not our goals. How many people, and I know I struggled with this for a long time. As the high achiever, I became the outcome. Like, I am the straight A student. I am the captain. And while those identities and archetypes can matter, behind that and beyond that in the infinite game is, well, like, who am I becoming regardless of the goals? Yeah. And I always like to use the language of mission markers, which feels like it can be embodied in any moment versus out there or outside thyself. And again, that was something that when I was growing up, until I understood some of this and started learning it for myself, I struggled with and felt like I couldn't even live life until said thing happened. And it can almost detract us from experiencing life and our joy or whatever that is, because you're so focused on something outside of yourself versus understanding that it's happening here and now, because time is essentially an illusion. Like, time is made up. We're not going to get into super meta in this episode. There's plenty of episodes in the past you guys can listen to where we get meta about that. But that's what I'm hearing, is just this difference between our lower brain and our higher brain, and the ability to access that self in any moment, and that higher self in any moment, or that infinite part of us in any moment, regardless of the outcome. And simultaneously, it's okay to want and have goals and desires and do things. Just recognize that those are going to come and go, and it's who you're expanding into in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And again, it's being able to take, like you said, that vision and that bigger picture into account, because without having that, it can feel like we're just spinning the wheels, or there isn't some sort of direction, especially if you are a goal-oriented person. And again, with this whole episode, I'm not saying not to set goals and have outcomes that you want to achieve, but it's like, how do we get into action and take action upon those, so that that's not the only thing that we're focusing on. It can be a part of the focus, but there needs to be something bigger and deeper behind it for us to sustain that progress, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like I talk about the 100-year-old self, right? And like, if your goal is to lose 50 pounds for a wedding, right, and you do it, like, great. But let's say you're 100 years old and you're looking back and you're going to be like, remember that time I lost 50 pounds for, James' wedding? And I was like, cool. And then I put all the weight back on. It's like, why did I care?
Right.
Like, are you really going to look back and be like, dude, that was totally worth it? Or what if you look back in your life, you're like, remember that time that I decided I wanted to get healthy, like
Yes.
truly, genuinely healthy?
Yes.
And I lost weight as a function of it. And then I was able to play pickleball in my 70s, and I was able to play golf in my 80s, and I was able to, keep up with my grandkids when I was in my 90s, right? Like, that's the stuff that's actually going to matter.
Absolutely.
No one's going to give a shit if you look good in your tux at a wedding when everyone was drunk anyways, right? No one's gonna fucking care. Right. So that's the way I try to look at it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valuable and really important, because it can be so easy to, again, focus on the finite things, like, oh, I'm just gonna do this for this thing 3 months from now, and you have to ask the question of, well, why?
Yeah.
Is it because you're addicted to looking good? Is it because you're addicted to external validation? Is it because XYZ, something, again, that's not truly in alignment with your values? Or is it because you want to be in a state of wholeness and health, which is what Michael and I talk about a lot in the Inspire Co. And health is you completely transcends all moments, right? In any moment, then in time, you can experience that in different ways, and your body's going to shapeshift. I know you're speaking to weight loss. For me, the clients that I work with, when it comes to entrepreneurship and women feeling empowered in their body, it's like, well, where can you feel empowered now, and just expand into that until the day you die? Yeah. And sure, you may be able to fit into a different dress, but at the end of the day, it's not about looking good or trying to get all this attention from people. It has to come from something, like you said, way bigger from within. So I always ask the question, well, why? And I know you have some great questions that I'm curious if it would be important or valuable to share, but you have some great questions that I know you ask your clients, and you brought us through a really great workshop here as far as like what questions can we start to ask ourselves to shift from the finite to the infinite game and connect with our vision, our mission, our purpose, which then I can jam on after. But I just really liked a lot of the questions that you asked here at the Immersion.
Yeah.
If you remember, it is 6 a.m.
I do remember them. Yeah, so maybe this is a good time if you have a pen and paper or just open like a document on your computer to write these down. The first question is, what finite games am I playing in my life? And if you need to try and understand what that is, it's like, what are the goals or the outcomes that I'm pursuing? It could be related to weight loss or health or fitness. It could be related to career. Could be related to like relationships, like maybe you're single and you're desiring to be in a relationship, or maybe you're wanting your partner to show up in a different way, which, you can't change people. Just want to give you a heads up on that.
I mean, I know, just to add to that,
Yeah.
for entrepreneurs that we work with, you and I both,
Yeah.
and myself with my one-on-one clients, like a lot of it is around collections.
Yeah.
Like
Like,
I
what
need to
revenue
hit,
am I going
yeah,
for?
I need to hit 50K in a month. And it's like, okay, but why? And
Yeah.
again, not that it's important to set monetary mission markers to hit your bottom line. And you have to ask, why?
Yeah.
You looking for accolades or stuff like that?
Yeah. So that's the first one, is what are the finite games that I'm playing in my life? And again, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know, like, feel free to reach out to me. The second one would be, what would happen if I achieved or won these finite games? So like, what would it look like in my life if I was to win and achieve these finite games? So if I achieve the weight loss, if I hit the collections goal, whatever it may be, like, and really like take your time to list all the things out. Like, what would that actually look like? Like, how would I feel? How would I look? What is everything that's connected to that accomplishment? Okay. Third question is, what would happen if I lost these finite games? Okay. So like, really think about it. What would be the emotional state? What would your bank account look like, right? All these things. What would your relationship look like? Consider all of the factors of your life, and what would it look like if you lost all of these games, being able to sit and reflect in it. And then the fourth question is, what actions would allow me to, or how would I turn these finite games into infinite games? And then to actually like conceptualize that, because it'd be like, okay, well, you haven't given me a framework to do it. The framework is, what actions would I need to take to make these finite games sustain long term? Or the other question, I think the easiest way to look at it is, what actions could I take now that are in alignment with my values that my 100-year-old self would be proud of? What could I do in this moment that I could reflect on and say, that was worth it, right? That not only allowed me to achieve my goals, but it allowed me to live a higher frequency and to a higher caliber of life for long term, rather than just being on this cycle over and over. So I think that was the questions.
Yes.
Kind of. Yeah.
It makes
I think
me.
I think I covered it all.
Yeah, you did. That was great.
Good.
It makes me think about when I'm sitting in the office with a new practice member who comes in, and maybe they are unaware of what we do in the office and how our style of chiropractic is different, and even your style of health coaching is very different. Because we do focus on this infinite game. And unless you have tapped into it, it can look a lot like, well, I just want to get out of pain. I just want this symptom to go away. I just want XYZ to go away. And there's no greater access to the visionary mind for their life, which does require us to access our prefrontal cortex. So something that I always ask practice members in the office is, well, beyond the pain, what's available for you? So you can take this, whether you're resonating with Michael's sharing, or maybe you're dealing with some physical health challenges and you're seeking support and a guide in that. It can look like, okay, beyond the pain, like, yes, what is this stopping you from? Well, it's stopping me from playing with my grandchildren. Okay, that might be more of something to lean into and expand into, that you want to be present with your grandchildren at any moment and be able to jump on a surfboard if they're chilling in Costa Rica at an Inspire Immersion, wink, wink. But something like that, where it's less about the finite thing that you're dealing with and more about just this transcendence of time that you want to be present. It's more of a state of being rather than a specific symptom or emotion or goal, just to add more to that. And I think that comes back to what is your vision in life? Because when you can have a vision for your life, that allows you to go through both pain and pleasure and support and challenge in any moment. Because even though Michael and I are speaking to playing the infinite game, it doesn't mean you're going to be separate from challenges. In fact, you may face even more challenges because you become more resilient and you see the long-term game that you're playing, and you can move through the ebbs and flows of life, which with much more resiliency, much more poise, much more groundedness. And you can have the cheesecake and it doesn't completely derail you into these states of guilt and shame. And, or maybe if you're an entrepreneur, you have a lower month of collections and you realize it's not make or break because you understand the ebbs and flows and the cycles of life.
Definitely. Yeah, a couple points you made there too, which I think is really interesting. And this is actually a new perspective that I just gained from what you shared. So I thank you for that. Is being able to live in infinite games is a more true form of discipline than trying to achieve outcomes. And what I mean by that is a lot of us think that discipline is like being able to say no to things, for X reason, which I think that is a form of discipline. But discipline is actually being able to do the things that we know are going to have the greatest impact and really control the inputs, as well as to be strategic about when and how we say no to things that might present themselves as opportunities, with the greater vision in mind, recognizing that sometimes it makes more sense to do things that might not advance you towards that outcome, but will over time advance you towards your bigger vision.
Yep.
Right. For example, with weight loss, there's a perception that if I'm super disciplined and I, don't have any dessert for 6 months and I am in a calorie deficit and I count on my calories and all that, like that type of discipline, yes, in 6 months might help you lose 50 pounds. But if it doesn't feel good and it's not in alignment with how you actually want to live, is it actually discipline? Or is it really self-sabotage, but in a way that feels good for a 6-month time frame?
Right.
Because again, I look at time horizons, like if you can do the thing and say no for 6 months, great. But if in 6 years you're actually worse off, like, is that really discipline, or is that a perception of discipline that in the long run is actually taking you further away from your vision? I just kind of thought of that as you were speaking. So I wanted to share that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no. And I think there's
because I love the idea of discipline. I think it's important, but I think we get so lost in the idea that discipline must be, I must take this action every single time, when in reality it's controlling inputs as well as when we say no, and recognizing there will be times that we say no and or choose different inputs that might not be in alignment with that outcome, but are in alignment with the bigger vision, especially with how we show up and operate, especially when it comes to managing and dealing with our emotions. So,
and that's the game is as life happens, the way that you master thyself is you learn how to mitigate and regulate your own inner state. If you can do that, that's a lot of what it takes to be a human on the planet and experience life. Because a lot of the stories we create happen within ourselves that really has nothing to do with external reality, which can also go back to certain root experiences or things that you dealt with in childhood that can actually become part of your mission. I know when I was younger, I felt like, again, sometimes lost, confused, like I was the only one who got certain things, and there was a lot going on in our family dynamics that I felt like maybe my friends or the adults didn't understand. And as painful as that was, and strategies I used to deal with that pain, whether it was drugs or alcohol or overachieving, eventually that became what has been the driving force of my mission for the planet, which is to help other women and people feel empowered in any state of being and any choices they make. Because in a moment in time, in many moments of time, I didn't feel empowered. I didn't understand what was happening with family dynamics or things that I dealt with as a child, which again is the more that you can realize that the pain and some of these finite games, you can transcend it and transmute it to the infinite, and it doesn't have to be a burden, but it can actually become your greatest gift. I know you've dealt with that with a lot of your weight loss journey, where the finite games can serve, but you've got to choose to look at the lesson and learn how to expand beyond that and realize that it's more than just that.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt.
Anything else to add?
No, I think, again, we gave you a little bit of a framework in this episode. If you want to see how you operate and what makes you tick and what ways you're playing these different types of games. And again, I really like that 100-year-old self framework and just being able to take things into the big picture. And again, with all of this, not saying that outcome goals are good, bad, right, or wrong, but recognize that they are one tiny piece of the overall bigger picture. And how do we live in an inspired way wherein the actions are in alignment with our bigger vision? So, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just get out of pain, or do you want to experience life and be able to go on a trip and go surfing or swim in the ocean?
Yeah.
Right. So shifting that mind frame can be really, really powerful.
Cool.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom, Michael. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. This is Dr. Mel with the Project Lioness podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We love and appreciate you, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. As always, peace, love, and keep inspiring. Bye.